In this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit about a ancient philosophical problem called the Ship of Theseus, which addresses the problems related to the self-involving identity in particular and properties of, in this case, objects. The Ship of Theseus was originally addressing issues concerning the identity of the self, but there's an underlying issue with the thought experiment of the ship of Theseus, which, to give you a brief outline if you're not familiar with it, involves you have this boat, Theseus's ship, in which you have parts being removed from that boat and in another area being reconstituted. So they're being put together and constituted as the original ship, but at the same time, simultaneously, where the original ship was is being replaced by new parts that look the same and appear the same, but are different parts, right? So they have different identities. And the question here is, well, if we take pieces of the ship one by one and rebuild the ship exactly as it is from those pieces that we take one by one and slowly replace it and remodel the old ship, is the ship still the same ship? And at what point would the ship, say, cease being the ship? Is it when we take the first piece out, the second piece out, or when we've taken, say, 75% of the ship out and replace 75% of the ship? Is it the same ship? Or if we completely remove the ship and we've completely removed each incremental piece one by one individually at different times and completely built from the same pieces in a different location. Another ship, has the ship just moved locations, or is the ship different at some point as we're moving through that process of rebuilding the ship somewhere else? And um, this is important for understanding the problems related to the self regarding identity characteristics of objects rather than actually the entire structure of the ship. It's really very difficult to uh, determine whether or not the ship is still the same ship. Of course, if it has all the same properties and characteristics and qualities, then we could say it's the same ship. But if it's going through these processes in which we're interacting with these objects at various times and instances and we're moving them somewhere else, how do we know there isn't these incremental changes going to each piece and property? And as it's being rebuilt, we just fall into the same problem and we never really get a solid answer and never really know fully, because it has the original characteristics, but it also has these new properties and these new characteristics. So the ship of Theseus can gain a novel identity. So the fundamental problem with the ship of Theseus has to do with a failure to actually apply directly to the self, as it's a ship. So let's say we had a dog or a living organism, and living organisms, as well as the self in particular, are all different from each other. So if we have a non-living thing in which we're looking at the problem of identity, of what it means, say, to be a ship, versus what it means to be a dog, versus what it means to be us as individuals, and particularly a self, um, those are different. And we can't just look at a ship and compare it very easily to the self and take parts of the self and say that that's the same thing, reconstituting that somewhere else. Because the self has very different qualities, characteristics, and properties that have a distinct nature from the non-living aspects of the ship. So let's use a dog, for example. If we go look at a dog and we start removing its limbs and various organs from it individually one by one and try to bring back that life or reconstruct that life the same way as it occurs, we run into even more issues of identity in regards to the self and various characteristics and properties in reciprocal relation to each other that constitute that dog as that dog in particular, rather than some other dog or something else entirely. Where the ship, having these non-living and non-perceptual characteristics, um, can more easily be compared to the same previous ship. And there's also less meaning that we attribute to that ship than the dog, because of these additional living and perceptual processes that are fundamental to that dog. That dog that we're taking the leg or the organs of and then we're reconstituting somewhere else will likely not be the same dog and will also likely die in the process if we remove every single component and completely rebuild it, unless that, of course, is being preserved somehow. So there's these very different distinctions that we're making between living and non-living categories when it comes to the problem of identity. And what matters seems to be more of these direct perceptions and living aspects of being that are important for characterizing the self rather than these physical properties and characteristics, such as the ships of Theseus. Because, of course, if somebody's going to go and take these individual parts of this ship and rebuild it somewhere else, and we have a ship that looks like the ship of Theseus, well, we run into that same problem of identity, but but we're less concerned on whether or not this ship is the real ship from that ship because of these physical characteristics. Where a dog, if we were to replace each aspect of one dog uh, and try to rebuild a dog the same way that we had from a previous dog, we're not going to necessarily feel the same way, and we're going to have very different moral considerations and perceptions of that because of the living status we give to that. And going one step further, when we move into these civilization categories, when it comes to perceiving other individuals and particularly having a self, and we start to remove aspects of that individual and remove their parts one by one, we're going to end up making also these same uh, distinct moral attributions compared to how we would perceive the ship from the dog and the dog from the self. We're going to end up viewing individuals who have a self as having these unique personality characteristics that define them and help contribute to what make them them, as well as their individual strengths that are very useful in terms of benefiting um, the self in particular. And these problems of identity, when we're looking at different categories, such as non-living, living categories, as well as the development of living categories, and particularly in regards to perceptions of the self, we're going to have different ways of viewing the problem of identity and what characterizes the self and things like subjectivity and these subject-object relations. So that's just a brief overview and addressing the ship of Theseus. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye.